Hello, this is the International Trade Section A lecture. Our prioritized center is Economic Center 46. Objectively, we're going to distinguish between absolute advantage and comparative advantage.
International trade is the exchange of goods and services between nations, or people and institutions that are in different nations. Since the quantity and quality of productive resources available in different nations vary widely, international trade promotes greater specialization, which increases total world output. Meaning, since some parts of the world have things that other parts of the world do not have, you can specialize in what things you do produce and then let the other parts of the world produce some of those other things. And therefore, everyone has more things and therefore is the better for it. Without international trade, a nation can consume only the goods and services that it provides for itself. So if we didn't have international trade, well, that would probably mean if we didn't trade with this part of the world, goodbye coffee, because we do not really produce a lot of coffee within the United States. The increased specialization that international trade allows leads to greater interdependence among producers and consumers throughout the world. So our definition for interdependence here, decisions or events in one sector of the economy, or part of the world for that matter, affect decisions and events in other sectors of the economy or other parts of the world. So an example we can use here, decisions in the Middle East to cut production of oil. So like Middle East, that's this part of the world here. So if they decide they're going to cut their oil production, that would affect worldwide sales of things like gasoline, because if you didn't know, you have to have oil to make gasoline. Automobiles, because believe it or not, automobiles actually run on gasoline and oil, and can't do without that. Also petrochemicals, which means like petroleum chemicals, which produces things like polyester, spandex, other types of synthetic fabrics. Also detergent that a lot of people like to use for their clothes. Those all actually come from petroleum or oil also. So if you cut your production there, it would affect those things too. And also any goods with any plastic. If you didn't know, you actually need oil to make plastic. So if they cut production of oil, it would make plastic more expensive also. So that basically means everything. Now, economic conditions and policies in one nation increasingly affect economic conditions in other nations. So problems of inflation and unemployment can actually be transmitted between countries through flows of trade and money. So recessions can be easily brought to previously unaffected countries through international trade. So when we had our most recent recession, it actually trickled to China. They weren't having a recession before, but they had one because Americans didn't have money and therefore couldn't buy their cheap plastic junk anymore. The labor productivity of a nation affects its international competitiveness. So when a nation's productivity increases, it actually helps make them more competitive with its trade partners. So if you notice on this, United States of America from 1950 to 2000 actually saw an increase of our productivity. Now, when a nation's competitiveness increases, more wealth can actually be generated, therefore creating better living conditions for its people. So over that time period, we were going up. Some other parts of the world were actually going down or staying pretty constant. Now, since we live in an increasingly global economy where what is done in one nation affects the rest of the world, economic issues must be analyzed by examining trends in trading levels, investments, foreign exchange values, and changes in public policies that are affecting those sectors. Now, productive resources are distributed unevenly around the world, which gives rise to differences in opportunity cost that make it desirable to specialize and trade. So, absolute advantage. This is when a nation can produce a product with a greater efficiency than can its partner in trade. So if the United States has greater efficiency than Brazil in raising cattle, then the United States has an absolute advantage in cattle production. If Brazil, on the other hand, has greater efficiency than the United States in coffee production, then Brazil has an absolute advantage in coffee production. So in this kind of situation takes place, if both want what the other produces more efficiently, then trade becomes very easy. So the U.S. can say, hey, we'll give you some cows, you give us some of that coffee. So that becomes an easier trade when that happens. Now, I should point out, while it is possible for one nation to have multiple absolute advantages over its partner in trade, like in this example, Tom actually has an absolute advantage here in both grapes and nuts. But the existence of an absolute advantage does not actually mean that the nation with the absolute advantage will produce everything while the other nation produces nothing. Rather, this is going to be determined by identifying comparative advantage. Now, comparative advantage is when a nation can produce a product at a lower opportunity cost than can its partner in trade. So, for this example, if Costa Rica devoted all of its resources to producing coffee, it could produce 25 million pounds per year, meaning if they only made coffee and nothing else, at the end of that 1 year, they'd have 25 million pounds worth of coffee. Or if Costa Rica devoted all of its resources to producing bananas, it could produce 5 million pounds of bananas a year, meaning if they only did bananas and nothing else, at the end of that year, they would have 5 million pounds worth of bananas. Now, the opportunity cost of producing 1 pound of coffee would actually be 1/5 pounds of bananas. So if you're curious, how do you figure that out exactly? Okay, so to determine what the opportunity cost is, you basically want to make a ratio. So you want to find out for every 1 pound of coffee, how many pounds of bananas can we not make? So if we want to make this into a ratio, so basically what that means is I want to turn this into 1. So 25 divided by 5 will make this a 1. So if we do that on this side of the ratio, we have to do the exact same thing on the other side of the ratio. So our common denominator here is 5. 5 divided by 5 is a 1. 25 divided by 5 is going to be a 5. So that's where we determine our coffee to banana ratio.
And the opportunity cost of producing 1 pound of bananas would be 5 pounds of coffee.
Now, if Panama devoted all of its resources to producing coffee, it could produce 12 million pounds per year, meaning if they only did coffee and nothing but coffee, they can make 12 million pounds at the end of that 1 year. Or if Panama devoted all of its resources to producing bananas, it could produce 4 million pounds per year. So the opportunity cost of producing 1 pound of bananas would be 1/3 pound of, or the opportunity cost of producing 1 pound of coffee would be 1/3 pound of bananas. So again, you want to do a ratio. So turn your coffee into 1. So to do that, divide this by 12. Which turns that into 1, which means you have to do the same thing here. So common denominator here is a 4. 4 divided by 4 is a 1. So 12 divided by 4 is a 3. So that's where you got the 1/3. Now the opportunity cost of producing 1 pound of bananas would be 3 pounds worth of coffee. So again, we calculate this in the exact same way we calculate all the other ones. So 4 divided by 4 will give you a 1. So 12 divided by 4 gives you a 3. So that's how we calculated that. So by comparing the opportunity cost of maximizing production in both countries, comparative advantage has determined who, in fact, should produce what. Now, don't forget, comparative advantage is different than opportunity cost. This isn't who produces more. This is who has a lower opportunity cost, who has sacrificed less. So 1 divided by 5 is 0.2. So this is a 0.3 repeating. So Costa Rica actually sacrifices less to produce coffee than Panama. So therefore, Costa Rica should do your coffee production. And Panama, they have sacrificed 3 pounds of coffee to make a pound of bananas, as where Costa Rica would sacrifice 5. So therefore, Panama should actually be the one that makes the bananas. So again, to recap, Costa Rica should produce coffee since it can produce it at a lower opportunity cost than Panama. And Panama should produce bananas since it can produce it at a lower opportunity cost than Costa Rica. So comparative advantage, I should point out, can change over time because of changes in a nation's economy or events occurring in other nations.
All right, that concludes International Trade Section A lecture. Our prioritized center is Economic Center 46. Objectively, now you can distinguish between absolute advantage and comparative advantage.